All right, well, thank you. Thank you for sharing your evening with me. I appreciate it, and I hope you find this talk interesting. I'm going to talk about the Oregon Gold Rush, and there's a couple of components to the gold rush that I'll talk about. I'm going to say up front that I'm going to stay away from the environmental issues because we could talk all night, all day, forever on this, and each one of us have our own opinions on whether we are pro-mining or anti-mining. I will try to sidestep that altogether. So you can see a montage of pictures here. These are all historical pictures. The one in the front, however, that has been a recent discovery. That's gold that was discovered in 2015 at actually one of the first pocket gold mines in southwest Oregon. So the outline of my talk, I'll give an overview, and we're going to start kind of with where you can get information, and then kind of go through a little bit about the geology of ore deposits in Oregon. And it's going to be very, very brief. That again is another subject that will take a long time to talk about. And then we're going to talk about where and when gold was discovered in Oregon, how it's mined, placer versus lode mining, or quartz mining or vein mining, noteworthy mines. And I'm only going to talk about a couple of those because we're going to talk about the biggest, the deepest, and the most notorious in that kind of line. And then we're going to briefly touch on the price of gold, some of the distinction and consequences of gold mining in Oregon. So with that said, let's go. So you can get quite a bit of information, and this is one of the projects I worked on before I left WWII, is that we put together a mineral information layer for Oregon, put most of the historical records online. There's an interactive map that shows you where all the mines are located, and they are fairly accurate. So you can get started there. You can see its web address is up there on the top right of the screen. The second is, if you want to learn about the geology of all the gold mining or gold deposits in Oregon, I recommend this Lindgren, the geology, the gold belt of the Blue Mountains of Oregon. Lindgren wrote this in the early 1900s. It's online there at WWII at that web address. In fact, you're looking at one of the first real geologic mines or geologic maps that were produced in Oregon. But Lindgren wrote beautifully, old style, very descriptive, and with a geologic dictionary, you can follow along fairly easy and understand what is going on both in the Northeast and the Southwest and the Cascades, for example. So I recommend that. It's just if you got to read one thing, you read him. So where are all the gold mines in Oregon? And most of you are kind of familiar with this cartoon up on top, which is basically the plate tectonics of the area. And what it's showing you in this case is that we have, let's pretend that these are the Cascades. This is out in central Washington or central Oregon. Again, we have the slab, the subduction zone here. And then out through here, we've got a spreading center. And we're not going to worry about this half of the mine here. But what we have in Oregon is we have these corrucopia volcanic hosted or volcanic massive sulfide deposits. We have about 6. I don't believe we have too many or none at all in Eastern Oregon, but they're mostly in Southwest Oregon. The most notorious, there was one notorious mine, which is a VMS, and that was the Formosa mine. And if you look online and read about that one, you understand that gave mining the black eye in Oregon. It is a massive, when I mean massive sulfides, go down to the bottom cartoon down here, you can see it's mostly copper, and it has all the base metals, including gold and silver. You can see down here that the way the cartoon draws it down here, it's got a black little smoker beside it. Now, when we get to the Southwest Oregon, we've probably in more of a accretionary prism. And these are the veins that, or the deposits we see, the gold deposits we see in Southwest Oregon. These are gold, silver, and they generally do not have a lot of sulfides with them. Those are shown right over, basically, they're not skarns, but they're kind of in this area too, right here, this where all this, where the smokers are. It's still part of the tectonics that cause them. But when you get in the Cascades, and also in Southwest and Eastern Oregon, you'll start to get these, what they call epithermal deposits. These are fairly shallow, level linears across. The temperatures are kind of 100 to 300 degrees centigrade. So we're talking about water that's boiling and much hotter. They're associated with volcanic activity. So down here in this cartoon, you can see where there's epithermal veins down here. We also have epithermal veins in Eastern Oregon and Central Oregon. We also, so they're quite common. Eastern Oregon and Southwest Oregon also have what they call mesothermal veins. Those are intermediate depth veins, 1,000 feet or 1,000 meters. They're a little bit hotter, from 200 to 300 degrees centigrade and higher, but they're under greater pressure. So they have a little bit of difference there in the ore textures and the secondary mineralization. But you can see those mesothermal veins are down farther in through here. They are generally associated with metamorphic rock, like we have in Southwest Oregon and Northeast Oregon. And then another type that we would be very interesting to find, and we've got examples of that. For example, the mineralization in the Cascades, there are porphyries there. These are low grade bulk tonnage, which means that there's a lot of rock that this mineral is disseminated into. It occurs right through here. Those are where the rock, where we're finding all these porphyries. But there have, in Oregon, there is not one that's been economic yet to mine. However, there is one place here just south, or I'm sorry, east of Salem. It's called the Detroit deposit or Bordite deposit. It is part of a porphyry that is or was economic back in the 80s. And the 3 basin rules was enacted in the 11th hour to stop mining it. So that is out there by Mill City in the Opal Creek area, if you're familiar with that. So switching to placer deposits, placer deposits are those that are loose on top of the ground. They can be residual. They can be along the sides of the hill slope, and they are on terraces. And we have a pretty significant terrace deposit in Southwest Oregon, or in most cases it's stream placer. And that's where, well, if you wanted to go today, you can go out to the Cascades and placer and try your hand at putting a pan in and trying to find placer gold. So now let me show you kind of where they are. So I've got a mineral potential and a mineral certainty map that I made as part of one of the projects. And what this what it shows is it has the dots here. And those dots right there, as you can see, through the Cascades down to Southwest Oregon. We have Central Oregon, and those are the Ouachita, and then in Northeast Oregon, we have them throughout the area there, down into the Mormon Basin, down into the Pueblo area in the Alvord Basin. These are all metal deposits, and what I've done is taken a few of the rock characteristics, mineralization, whether it was there, even if there was agate deposits there, and came up with a mineral potential or certainty of what kind of rocks would contain a specific mineralization. And this is what it kind of looks like. So what the green tells you is there's least likely. The tan is there's really no potential there. Now this blue rock is all the volcanics, the tuffs and everything out there in the central part of Oregon and southeast. So those are kind of moderately likely, but you can see here in the red, that's where, if you're going to look, I would look in those red areas. So that's kind of the basics of geology. I'm not going to go into the models that created all these because there just isn't time. So kind of let's change gears and go, where was all this discovered? Well, in Jackson County, they've got even a tourist or a kind of a historical marker where they think that gold was discovered, and that's just kind of north of Jacksonville. It's in a gulch area called Rich's Gulch, and they think it was discovered in 1852. Now, folks in Josephine County say no, it was discovered a couple months earlier in 1851, and that's up there on the Illinois River where Josephine Creek, where the mouth of Josephine Creek. So what I'm going to say is we're going to make a happy compromise. We're going to say that prospectors working north out of California probably discovered gold there at Josephine Creek. And then later on, when a couple of packers were coming north from the Portland area down south to the gold fields down in California, they camped and found small nuggets there at the Gulch, and they're credited with the discovery. So that will end the arguments there, I guess. So this map kind of shows you, and the area that we find gold, or kind of what we're looking at as far as gold. All the blue lines are the placers, and there's really three main rivers there. It's the Rogue, the Applegate, and the Illinois. Then we have the red, which is an outline of all those little dots that I showed you on a previous map, which are mines, prospects, and occurrences. So those areas shows you where the placers were, where the gold originated for those placers. There's also the beach deposits that contain gold. You know that when we were there at the field trip last weekend, all that black sand that we walked on to get to a lot of those areas on the beach contained gold. They still do. And you can go up to Beverly Beach, for example, and pan it right out of the black sands there. And I've done it there. So so think about this. Back when they were panning, it was $20.67 an ounce, troy ounce. So someone who was panning out there could make $400 a day. And then, anywhere from $1,500, $2,000 a week. So that was pretty good money if you were the first ones there. When the time went on, though, making a living like that became harder and harder. And what I should point out too, that generally this placer, and you'll see placers the next couple of maps, just think placer mining lasted 5, maybe 10 years at the most. But after that, lode mining gained prominence in this case, in Southwest Oregon by the 1870s. And when I mean lode mining, I mean, think of a mine, a hard rock mine where you see quartz veins and so forth like that. That's what lode mining means. So in Eastern Oregon, gold was discovered at Griffin Gulch, and it's not too far. You can actually see Baker City from Griffin Gulch. It's to the southwest. And it was kind of an accident. They were looking for the Blue Bucket mine, and that was a fabled mine that everybody still looks for now if you're one of the treasure hunters out there. And the Adams party split off, and this group here camped over the winter, and they found gold there. So that is credited with the rush for gold in Eastern Washington. So you can see here, again, the blue is for placer. That was where they were dredging for gold. The red is where the mines are located that provided the gold for placering. And gold, the plastering, again, gold was discovered in 1862, and 10 years later, it started to play out. And you can see here, even in 5 years, they're starting to look for lode mines, but it didn't take. It took another 20 years or so to really get the hard rock mining started, and that took the railroad to come into town. So you can see some of the names of the mining camps that here. Auburn used to be a pretty populated town, and all there is just a marker there now, for example. Canyon City, Gortsville, Granite, and the Mormon Basin. So last but not least is the Cascades, and there are 5 deposits there. They are the one up here to the north, up here at Opal Creek, was discovered in 1858. Gold Creek is named for the discovery. And if you go on the trail there to the Jawbone Flats, you cross the bridge over Gold Creek. The one now, the most important one perhaps, is down here. It's called Bohemia, and it was discovered in 1863. And the rest of these up here have had their share of gold. I will say, though, that the gold is the greatest to the south and decreases as we go north up to the Opal Creek. So just to let me kind of run down a quick little chart. So you can see here that we started in 1910 and go to 2010, 100 years in the price of gold. So it's still down here. It was down here at $20.67 an ounce. It jumped here at 35 in 1934. President Nixon devalued or took the gold standard away. And so now we see gold prices fluctuate. And I should have had another line coming up here as the gold prices are, have reached nearly $2,000 here in modern times. But you can see down at the bottom there that about $9 billion at today's prices were extracted from the gold fields from 1850 to 1965. That's a lot of money. This chart kind of summarizes how the gold was produced. Here we start at the initial. This is probably just when California was the 49ers had started to go into California, but by so gold production by 1852 is starting to climb up here, reached its zenith here in 1862, fell down. Then we started to get lode mining in the 1860s in both Southwest and Northeast Oregon. Now, what has happened here is that gold mining placer had kind of waned away, and now it was mostly lode mining. And I'm going to add here too that there was dredging that started in the early 1900s, and it sustained the gold throughout this. And I will talk about dredging as we go on in this presentation. Again, here we go to 1934, $35 an ounce gold, and then all of a sudden we get quite a bit of gold production in terms of dollars, and then World War II started. And the government issued Order L208, which essentially said non-essential mining was not going to be supported. If it didn't support the war effort, we weren't going to provide men and materials. And Oregon did not provide any kind of resource or commodity to the war effort, although a couple places were looked for doing that. And one that was really astonished me is that they looked for clays for camouflage in Oregon to try to find that. So in 1945 it was lifted, and then production after that was mostly from dredging, and it lasted up to into the 60s, but was really it had tapered off not too many years after this, the early 1960s. And you can see here that when I said earlier that dredging outpaced all processes combined, that was lode and placer from 1913 on. So let's talk about placer mining now and how minerals were extracted. So what we see here is we don't see the old typical Hollywood type miner here with gray whiskers pulling or leading his burro along. We're seeing young men or younger men. We're not seeing very, you don't see any of them that are carry a few pounds like I do. These are hard, tough times. So this man is panning. He is doing a washer. This man is using a long, what they call a long tom, which is a sluice box. And notice that he's African American. So California had from anywhere from 10 to 50,000 African Americans, and they were either free or they were slaves that made it to California and they mined there. The picture here is a sluice, probably a ground sluice, and it probably was used to work these. This is a hydraulic mine. We had hydraulic minings all the way up into 1935 in Oregon. It was, if you remember or recall, that in California, they banned that as early as the 1860s in California. And we'll talk a little more about this. This is the dredge boats. This is a dredge, a bucket dredge. They had drag lines, power shovels, and even suction dredges, which kind of surprised me. The kind of suction dredges we find out there now with the miners out there, but they don't call them the miners, the small-time miners that are finding fewer and fewer places to use their dredges nowadays. So there was 56 dredges that operated in the state, and 9 of them were in South Carolina. This is kind of a schematic of what one of those would look like, and they're nothing different than a sluice box. There's a trommel there that tumbles all the rocks out, and this is where your sluice box starts, and this is where they collect their gold. They also amalgamated the gold, and I will explain what that is. That's where they use mercury, and we'll look at that a little bit in greater detail in a slide or two from here. As I mentioned earlier, dredging was underway in the early 1900s. 1904 is the date I've been coming up with most. So let's switch over to lode mining, quartz or hard rock mining. And this is we're going to kind of start here and branch out, and we're going to go counterclockwise until we get around to all these pictures. This is a typical diagram or diorama of a mine, and all of these pictures, except for this black and white, are pictures that I took, and I went underground, and only fools and God protects geologists and damn fools is what I've always been told, and that's exactly what we do here. So here's an adit. So that's the entrance to a tunnel. This is a vein, and the adit, the tunnel follows the vein. So that is called an adit here, and that's called a drift. This is a shaft right here, and this is the cage where men and materials were transported down. So about 5 to 6 men could get in that cage, and they were lowered down into the mine levels. These are drilling. So this guy is drilling right down here. This is called a stope right here. This one, as you will follow my mouse, that's a drift. And then when you started to mine upward, that's called a stope. And that's what this miner is doing right down here. When you needed to follow a ore zone, you would generally drive not necessarily a shaft, but you drove a winch, which is an angled shaft, down to find ore below or connect to a different level. And this is what a winch looks like. This one's flooded. This is a crosscut tunnel. So when you're trying to get to a drift, so we're walking to a drift, which this tunnel will turn off to in a little while and go on to a drift where they're following the ore like it is here. And this is a ore chute where they're loading the ore right there. And of course they have pumps down to the bottom. So these are mines in Oregon, mostly in the Cascades that I took these pictures. This is a view of the processing of the gold ore or ore in Oregon. And you can see that these are multi-level. There's the top level was where the ore is dumped into a ore hopper, into a grizzly where it separates out the small rocks from the large. It goes into an ore bin, into an ore crusher. So it goes to an ore crusher, which is here. It goes into from the ore bin, it is placed into these dropping stamps or hammers or a stamp mill. And each one of those stamps is anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 pounds each. Then that materials that goes out of the stamp mill is then goes out and washes onto an amalgamation plates in front of the stamp batteries. And that plate, these are copper plates coated with mercury, and the gold will stick to mercury. And that's the amalgamation process. Other mines, for example, the Olga in here in the Cascades, the gold mine now, they tried to use chlorination. And in a couple of pictures down, or some pictures that I'll show later on, will actually show where they use cyanide to help process the ore. Now, mercury amalgamation produces what they call sponge gold. And so sponge gold, so they'll scrape the copper plates, recover the mercury, put it into these retorts, they'll heat the retort, the gold will stay, the mercury will turn into a vapor, they will condense it and cool, and they will collect that again to reuse. So amalgamation actually really started in the Carolinas, in North Carolina in particular, at the Reed mine in the early 1800s. So it's a process that's been going on. So these four little cubicles that are about 2.5 inches, as you can see here, is about 2 in diameter. That's about $30,000 worth of gold. I wanted to also show you that in 1860, when Sweets, our town founder here in Tualatin, was a merchant and was going out to the gold fields in Eastern Oregon and in Idaho, he would sell quicksilver for $2.25 an ounce. Remember, gold back then was $20 and $67 an ounce. You didn't want to waste the mercury because you couldn't operate on that. And amalgamation was used in everything, practically everything back then, to help catch the fine gold. But what I want to show you next is the inflation. So we have an apple here at two for 50 cents. We have oranges here that were sold for 15 cents here earlier in California. And today that would mean that per orange, that would be nearly $5 per orange at the store today. So it just kind of gives you an idea of the prices, miners. There was a different kind of mining going on, and that was the merchants that followed mining. So that was another rush for gold in Oregon, was the merchants that followed the miners to the gold field. So that's the kind of the end. I'm going to talk about the extraction process. So let's talk about now some of the more important areas or mines that had some sort of distinction. And I'm going to start with water. Without water, you couldn't do anything. You can't mill, you can't placer, you can't hydraulic. So what they did is they built ditches. And Oregon has, you can go to Southwest Oregon and you can actually walk the Sterling ditch. And it's down here, it's where my mouse is, and it looks like that's in Josephine County, or we're close to it. So that was that was dug in a year, 23 miles hand dug in a year by 400 men. That's quite an accomplishment. And these ditches aren't just small things. They're 2 or 3 feet deep and 3 or 4 feet wide. The longest ditch in the United States, so we can boast about that, that's the El Dorado ditch in Baker County. And Chinese laborers, maybe you quite estimated to be 1,000, dug that ditch, and that's the longest one in the United States. So without that, you could not do what's pictured here. This is the old Channel mine near Gleese, and Gleese is in Josephine County. It's to the northwest of Grants Pass. It's the largest hydraulic pits in Oregon, and I'll show you pictures of those. I mean, there's quite a few years there, nearly 85 years of hydraulic mining. It's in the $1 Million Club, so they took out quite a bit of gold there. You can see 2 hydraulic giants or monitors working this, and this is a long ground sluice where whatever was washed off the hills would go down this sluice box, and they would clean it and and they would recover the gold out of it. This is what it looks like today. So you can see these. This is a topo map and here's the Rogue River. This is Galice right here. There are 1, 2, let's see, how many have I got there? There's at least 8 deposits along this hillside. And these are what's called, this is called a terrace deposit. So the gravels are sitting up on a terrace. There we go. And they would chew the gravel. Now you can see it's only on one side. It's not on this side. So this is a fault controlled deposit here. And this, everything to the west, northwest of Galice Creek was uplifted. And that's how come the gravels are preserved here. Now, if we put the LiDAR on top of that, so this is one of the deposits, or one of those hydraulic pits. And you can see there's quite a bit of a scar there. There's the Rogue River down here. The town of Galice is right there. And so this one's, we're looking at this one right here, this deposit, that mine. And today, if we put the aerials on top of it, you can see Mother Nature is trying to take it back, and eventually it will. And at least from the air, it's getting harder and harder to see these old mining areas. So let's turn our attention now to the dredges. And I think maybe all of you, or if you haven't, I certainly recommend that you go visit the Sutter Valley dredges in Baker County. And this is the dredge number 3. So that means there was 2 that preceded it. It was operated from 1913 to 1954. It dredged left the dredge tails, or the largest dredging areas in Oregon, from the town of Sumter, north of Sumter, town of Sumter, all the way down to the Powder Lake. And in this case, there was 4 dredges that worked this placer, and that includes the one here to the north of Sumter. And this is, if you look at the LiDAR, you can see that how it kind of just these are the tailings left behind the gravel. Now you're going to ask, well, why hasn't this been reclaimed? Well, because there's water in here and all sorts of ponds and other wetland features that now it's become its own habitat, and you can mine it. I will back up and say that there is interest in mining this area again, and there's been some work there to do some exploration. Who knows? There may be some life left in that dredge field after all. So again, okay. So now we're going to switch now to Southwest Oregon, and we're going to look at some of the bigger mines down there. And we got 3 of them that we're going to look at. And from going from west to east, or from west to east, yes, we're going to do the Benton Mine, Greenback Mine, and the Ashland Mine, and they all have their own distinction. And what I'm showing you here is a map of Southwest Oregon. It is shows the various terrains. I made this map for a study I did for the Oregon Department of Transportation, and to show where all the mines occurred for them for a hazardous materials evaluation. So they're in the mostly in the western Klamath terrain. The Yola Bolo terrain is pretty much devoid of mineralization. It's the Donut sandstone is there. So you can pretty much map the edge by the distribution board of mines out there. And the Ashland is out here, and it's in the Applegrate group. So let's get started with the Benton. The Benton is the largest operation in Southwest Oregon, or underground operation in Southwest Oregon. It also was the only operating mine all the way into the 2006, or before it was abruptly closed. And it closed because it had a permitting problem eventually with the GAMI, and it also had difficulties getting financing after that. but it produced $1 million, and you can see its old mine workings there. And they actually used rubber tired excavator in there, and they had their mill down in down the valley in Grants Pass, and so they trucked everything out. Kind of an interesting operation. So that's the Benton. Now the Greenback is probably arguably the most profitable one. And I mentioned that there was an operation that used cyanide, and it is the picture of a cyanide tree was used down here. And those are the tanks that use cyanide. Cyanide will dissolve gold out of solution, and then you can use various things, generally that's been carbonized, to catch the gold, and then you burn off the carbon and recover gold that way. But it operated all the way up into the 50s. The next one is the Ashland mine, and it is to the west of Ashland, and it is the gold mine that had the most persistent gold vein in Southwest Oregon. And what I've got here is I've got the mine maps to show you what I mean by that. All this black area has all been mined out. So that vein went from this level all the way down in at least 5-6 levels below this. So this mine was developed fairly deep and had the most persistent. It is also part of that $1 million club. It closed in the 1930s, and you don't see anything after that here. So those are the mines of distinction here in Southwest Oregon. If we take a look now and we go over to the Blue Mountains, I want to show you really a couple of areas that have distinction here. So we're going to talk about the Buffalo mine, and you can see a map here. So we're not too far from Granite, Sumter, in that area right here. This is the Buffalo mine right here. This is the North Pole Columbia vein system here, or they call it extension. But that we'll talk about that in a minute. But first, let me say that the red area is the Bald Mountain batholith, and it's one of the largest in eastern Oregon. And it's about 240 square miles in area, and it's a composite intrusion. It's got granite, tonalite, gabbro rocks in it, so it's kind of a hodgepodge of things. So and all this white area around it is mostly argillite, and you can see most of the veins here are associated with at least some with the argillite right here. The Buffalo is too. So here's the Buffalo. It's the longest operating mine in the Blue Mountain region. You can see the portal that was last used in 2006, the old mill building in 1950s. This one was operated in 80 years. For 80 years, there is still occasional interest, or there was when I was working at Dagami, at looking at this mine to reevaluate and see if it could be operated successfully. So let's go now to the North Pole Columbia lode, or the extension, if you want to call it that. And it's a combination of 4 different mines: the Golconda, the Columbia, the E&E, and the North Pole. And you can see down here this cross section that goes from west to east, basically. And shows you the properties. And these lines right here are the levels and and how deep they went. So right now, this trace is about 4.5 miles long, and it was the host here, like I said before, is argillite. There is granodiorite there too. The rocks, this particularly, the rocks are sheared, and that is what's controlling the ore deposits there. And the stopes are continuous for over 9,000 feet in length. So I mean that's pretty remarkable. And right now, the North Pole is well, right now everything that's vertically below this is open and unexplored. So who knows what's going to be there. I will tell you that these are arsenic rich and they're full of antimony as well, and that's so that's kind of makes it difficult for somebody to go in there and propose mining when it's a pretty fairly closed system. It's Cracker Creek, and you have all this water, all these issues that you have to deal with. And this one is well over the $1 million club. It's in the 800 million clubs. But the biggest one of all, and I might well just show you, this only lasted 10, 11 years. That's quite a bit of money taken out there in a short deal of time. So the biggest one is this one. This is the Cornucopia gold mines. And here's Baker right here where my cursor is. And Cornucopia is up here to the east northeast, kind of up from halfway. This is the Union Champion and the Last Chance. And this one was in the 1940s, the 6th largest gold mine in the United States. And it produced 10 to 17 million dollars, and it's got 36 miles of tunnels. I worked in a mine in southeast Missouri that had 10 miles of tunnels, and the district itself was about 36 to 56 miles. I mean, wow, this takes a little bit of time to drive from one end to the other. So that's a very impressive. The mine was closed. The L208 closed this mine. It still was in operation. It still had gold inside, and it never really reopened after that. There was some attempts, but it just never really caught on. And I'm going to end this this part of it, of the mines with the most distinctions, with the ones that's most nefarious. So town of Copperfield and the Iron Dike mine at Homestead to the north of it right here was a problem for the governor and Governor Oswald West, because it was viewed as the baddest, broadest, bodiest, and most unlawful town in Oregon in 1913. So he sent his secretary, Fern Hobbs, with a detachment of soldiers, and they went out and they cleaned up the saloons and gambling halls and the red light establishment and closed them down in 1914. So there you go. That's the most serious one. So if I got a little more time left, let me go and talk about the rushes on in Oregon. So how did they get here? So we're going back now to 1843. If they didn't want to use the Oregon Trail, which is this one up here, and go through the rapids on the Columbia River or up the Barlow Trail later on, they used the California Trail and took the Applegate Trail to the north to get to the Willamette Valley. That was the main route. In Southwest Oregon, there was no permanent settlement. But when gold was discovered, the Applegate Trail became pretty significant because now it was not only traffic going north, but it was also traffic going south. And that's how the mines were supplied. And Scottsburg was one of the centers for the resupply or supply of the early miners in the Southwest Oregon. And they would undock off the Equina there, and pack trains would take freight down to the miners, and it was 12 cents to 30 cents a pound. Again, remember, gold was $20.67 an ounce. It wasn't too long before your money ran out. Now, when they later on in the 1860s, there was when gold was discovered in Eastern Oregon and also in Idaho, most of the folks, at least from Portland, would use the Columbia River back and forth on ferry. They would take they would either disembark at the Dalles, or they would go up to the Umatilla or Walla Walla, and then they would either take the Oregon Trail to reach the gold fields in Eastern Oregon or Idaho, or they would take the Dalles Road that was being constructed at that time and take it and use that road to get to the points east. This is kind of a picture of what the Dalles looked like, and you can see there's the store, and this was one of the bigger motel or hotels there at the time. So that's how they supply. That was the supply sources for that area in the 1860s. Now, as a last thing, I'd like to go is the price of gold. It also came with it also came with consequences and cultural distinctions. So for the people who were going to, or for the families who migrated to Oregon, and for before the 49ers went stampede, those going to California went there for land. Later on, they went for gold. The Land Act, the Organic Act in 1843, then the donation land claims later on in the 1850s, followed by were the reasons for richer families who sold their farms in the east to move to the west. That was the folks that came to Oregon. Immigrants that came for gold were not families. They were mostly young men, and we saw that in one couple of the pictures that I showed you. And there was over 300,000 that came with that migrated to California, and a lot of those and many of those 49ers migrated and followed the gold as it was discovered through Oregon. They were diverse. They were, for no other better term, itinerants, and they were merchants and others. And they, and like I said, they moved along with the gold. But in doing so, we all had problems. There was hostilities in California at the onset, and Oregon was no different. So the Europeans that came here in had skirmishes, and there was claims of atrocities from both sides. The war started in 1854 with the Rogue River Indians, or the Rogue River Indian Wars began in 1854. 7 tribes were involved with that. And then by 1856, Indian occupancy ended in Southern Oregon. So what you see here are some of the proclamations for mustering men to go out and to remove the Indians. As this one says, Chinamen not residents in the state of Oregon were not considered a resident of the state of Oregon, therefore could not hold any real property. So, and that also applied to African Americans. That was in the initial 1859 Constitution, and that's where that was taken from. But the Chinese migrated into Northern California, and in the 1850s, they migrated into Oregon. There was the population grew, and they were hired initially, but then the Europeans said no. So if they were hired for hydraulic mining company, ditches. They dug all the canals, constructed bridges and trestles. So that was the labor they used. And of course, there was the massacre that occurred along Hell's Canyon, in that 34 Chinese miners were killed. And it's my understanding they were killed because they were being robbed of their mining equipment. So, there was the social consequences there too. And so those are kind of the last 2 slides were kind of the very negative consequences of mining, but there is some positives that came out of this. If you look at it from kind of this view, that gold mining was the mainstay for the economy in the Southern Oregon and later in Eastern Oregon. and it started settlements, built roads and schools. It even had the first local government, or one of the local governments, particularly in Eastern Oregon, and it established law and order. Now, again, that came at a price. And so, but I want to say that when gold mining started, that's when farmers came to the valleys and sold their produce and to the miners, and logging followed the minings, because when the mines were, when the lode mines were being constructed, they needed timber. So towns, cities, and everything else followed after that. So that's kind of my end of my presentation, and thank you for listening. And if you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, there's a couple of questions that are in the chat box, and I can go ahead and ask them. Or Charlie, would you like to, since you posed both of them, why don't you just ask?
Okay, you showed diagrams of the ore body. How much of that ore body were the typical ore body were they able to remove?
In the ones that you could probably remove 80% of it in an ore body. If it was a stope, you could see stopes that would, for example, the map that showed the Ashland mine, that whole black area, that grayed out area was one giant open space. So if there was what I didn't mention there, if there was the ore zone or the ore body itself, and not all of the vein was full of mineralization, so they just mined that ore zone, they could generally get most of it, if not all of it. If they did leave something, they left another 10 feet or so for a tunnel, but they often took those out too. So in some cases, it could be 80% or even more. And for dredge tailings, I didn't show you pictures, but a lot of people will come up on social media and show you that they went out with a metal detector and started finding rocks full of gold in it. And yes, so there's gold still left there.
Yeah. I
So
remember visiting a mine in Julian in Southern California, and they were taking the mine tailings and heap leaching them.
Yes, and that's where they use cyanide. So what they do in heap leach is they grind it up to to powder. So they mill it to a very fine grain, and then they will sprinkle. They'll put it in a heap, and they will sprinkle a cyanide solution over the top. The cyanide solution would infiltrate, and as it infiltrated through the pile, it would then dissolve gold. They'd collect the leachate, and then they would process that and recover gold. And the mines in Eastern United States had done that successfully. And that's just and that's the way these lower grade ore deposits are worked, and most of them are done that way. So I didn't show you the slides, but in Eastern Oregon, there is a mine now that it will use that process. Although it will be contained in a building, it will not be outside, but that is being permitted as we speak. And that's the one, it's called the Paramount Mining is doing it. And that's the one out in Mount Hero County. So.
Everyone's worried about cyanide, which tends to be very reducing. What about using nitrite or sulfite instead of sulfate or
nitrite? I don't really know that process, but it's been cyanide leaching or heap leaching is still legal in Oregon. It's highly regulated though. In Montana, for example, it is outlawed outright. In Nevada, it is used predominantly in all of their mining efforts out in Nevada. And if you're in an airplane and you're headed south to Houston, you will fly right over a few of those giant pits out there. So now for dredging, like I mentioned, that the dredges can only go so deep. And they will look for deeper levels, and then they will look on the outside of those dredge channels for areas that they missed. Gold Rush, for example, on Friday nights, tonight, for example, there's a good example of trying to find those areas that the old timers missed, but they missed darn few of them. So that's yes. You can go out now to any of the, you can still go out to some of those dredge areas and still get a fair amount of gold. The gold dredging
By panning?
Gold dredging is not
Efficient.
efficient. I mean, you will catch what they missed.
So
And
you
that's
spend
what-
time panning for the remains?
You can pan for the remains or go out there with a sluice spot or sluice that's better equipped to handle it. A mill plant and go after it that way. So there's plenty of ways to do that.
Would you do that?
Would I do that? I would do it if my son would do it because he's a mechanic, and because every time you turn around and watch a gold rush, something breaks down, and that's the truth of it. If you guys got to keep mechanically running to get it going. So I think the mechanic, I see a couple of people grinning on that. I think the mechanic's the most important person out there. Don't need a geologist, need a mechanic. So
Thank you.
Okay, well, you've also got some nice comments that I want you to read in the chat box, Clark. And I'm going to stop the recording right here. And so you folks feel free, though, please stay on and ask more questions. I'm going to stop it right now.